wheels start to go in my head that this was really something deep, and it was egregious, and it was poisonous, and it was a culture of cover-up. Is when I first understood what was happening. And like every mother, I had to unlearn that message. You know, for some mothers it's very hard because it's so intimidating. You're already in grief, you're broken. And for years you are taught that the policemen are supposed to help you. And when you have one to threaten you, you have to unlearn that so that you can fight. And that's why when I see mothers, such as the mothers that are here today, that have done just that, I am in awe, and I am so proud of these mothers, because you literally have to change your grief into fuel. Because when you lose a child, I always say it changes your DNA completely. You know, Clinton's killing contained almost every dimension of the current crisis in policing in the United States. You know, my son was black, and a black person is 2.5 times more likely to be shot to death by police than whites are. My son was unarmed, and yet he was perceived by a fully armed white officer as a lethal threat. My son was shot multiple times, and I always think about that. Officer feared for his life, and you got off 7 shots. Wow. When did you stop fearing for your life? Was it after the first shot, the second shot, the third shot, the 4th shot, the 5th shot, the 6th shot, or maybe that last shot in the back up close? This officer had a record of falsifying reports and using excessive force, who killed my son. And there were no charges, no indictments, no trial. And in our family's wrongful death civil lawsuit, this officer escaped civil liability on the basis of the judicial doctrine of qualified immunity. Ending qualified immunity is a huge step forward and will help families seeking justice in wrongful lawsuit death suits in federal court. But we must focus as well on the wrongful death itself. We have to create a national standard for the use of deadly force that is based on measurable, more objective criteria than the officer's perception. I feared for my life. For example, we could write a law prohibiting using deadly force against an unarmed person, or a person that is running away. If a person is running away, they're running away from you, not to engage with you, or driving off in a car. A criteria an officer or a juror or a judge can apply to the actual facts to a case. These are the major issues that we will put before Congress as Mothers Against Police Brutality. Thank you for hearing both of our testimonies today.
First of all, I just want to thank you for your bravery. This is not easy, especially in the current moment in the political climate we're in. It's not easy for anybody, but particularly for you who have experienced it up close and personal. It's even that much scarier. So I just want to recognize your courage and applaud you, because I think this is what we need. I think your testimonies were quite clear. I think that both of you have done this work for a while and are very clear about some of the policy changes that are needed. The one thing that, of course, struck me as I was listening to you is the fact that in almost all the cases that we hear, the officers involved have had a history. And we have seen concerted efforts through the decades that I've been doing this work to try to roll back transparency about that, to try to erase and hide those records. But there's a renewed sort of commitment to that fight from an administration that is talking about corruption and transparency and, wanting to root out corruption and be more transparent. It's like the words are very contradictory to their actions. So I guess your testimony has got me thinking about what can we do so that we're not reliant on their databases? Are there ways to get access to the information that they're trying to hide and have a non-governmental entity be responsible for making those records available to the public? So that's one thought that occurred to me. And I think beyond the policy changes around qualified immunity, use of force, standards, and the things that you both mentioned, I wonder if, looking back, there were things that would have, in the immediate moment of grief and turning your grief into fuel. We were talking earlier about how that's a little different for someone who maybe the incident happened 10 years ago versus like it happened last week. But in those moments following the tragedy, are there things that community leaders could have done better as well, so that we can work to close some of those gaps where you felt like you had the support you needed and you were safe in taking a stance?
I will say, being in Dallas, Texas, it was very difficult. In Dallas at the time, we had a black police chief, black DA. We even had a black fire chief. But learning now, we know that a lot of white politicians that are mayors and governors put these black people quite often in these positions as gatekeepers. And so you really don't have the community support that you think you have when these incidents happen. So from what I've learned and having an organization is that we have to build change agents in our communities, like the fellowship, the Legacy Fellowship program that we have. Change agents in the communities that know how to react when these are happening, that know how to give families the guidance that they need, that can tell the family, you don't need an attorney right away. You have a right to have this record, you have a right to have this, and can go into meetings with the police departments. We didn't have any of that when Clinton was killed. And, we have since helped other organizations do that in other cities. And that's very important because you have a lot of, different activists that like to be activists when there is cameras, I'll say it. And it doesn't help the families. It helps them, but it doesn't help the families. So creating the change agents in the communities that can really be there for these crises is a game changer. Yeah.
Appreciate that. So it's almost, it sounds as in a way, like sort of a template or a toolkit where here are the initial steps that are actually important, and here are some of the things you should try to avoid.
And that's interesting you should say that, because that's what MAPP is putting together, that people will be able to download from our website.
That's great. Thank you.
Just something to start with.
Yeah. Thank you.
I wanted to mention that it's very similar. I think back, and again, I'm 25 years in, and I think back then, and it was, police brutality was probably prevalent, but it wasn't as wide and as openly known as it is now. And so back then, I was very blinded by the process, and I mentioned in my testimony that just 16 days earlier, we lost my husband, who was more familiar with the judicial system than I was. So that was going to be, had he been alive, he would have helped me to fight through this process. But there were limited organizations that were focused on police brutality back then. So, and I felt like that, I was one of a very, very few in Prince George's County, which at that time was the #1 across the nation in police brutality, police killings across the country. And so when the state's attorney, I think you may have called them DAs, but the lead state's attorney was a black man. He sat down with me, he sat down with my family, and he explained to me that we've gone through and we've looked at the witness statements, and this is definitely a wrongful death here. So we're gonna indict, but they indicted one officer, but not both. And I believed in him. And I think that is one of the biggest things that I tell people. Don't believe what you hear. You got to do your own research. Because I went into that, it's like, I'm going to get justice for Gary. My family's going to get accountability. And it doesn't always work. We a lot of times find that they're in bed with judges, and they're all kind of, connected to one another. So it's important that you do your research. So if I had a do-over, I would have done it a lot different. So because I don't have the do-over, I take the opportunity with the Coalition of Concerned Mothers and through our experiences that we share with other families. As it relates to whether or not we can do our own databases, that is underway. There are other organizations within the state of Maryland and in DC, where when there's a killing, they document it, they have the database, they share with us. And then they do some research to see where these officers come from. Are they part of if you will, a dirty dozen group, and provide that information? Because we cannot trust that the system is going to give us the information that we need to be able to document these officers and where they, where they have been, and where they have been transferred over and over and over again. So it's definitely the responsibility of the people, because that's where the information is going to come from us.
Yeah, I appreciate that 100%. Thank you.
Again, thank y'all for sharing your stories. Y'all do it with such poise, but I can't fathom how many times you've had to do this to get to where you are today, right? I have a quick question, if y'all don't mind sharing. At the time of losing your children, do you mind sharing, what was your profession at that time?
And by the way, I'm sorry for your loss as well. I was an IBM executive.
IBM executive. Mary?
I was an executive with Bank of America.
Bank of America. So it's safe to say that at that time, you may have not had any experience with the judicial system, the legislative process at all, right? So I asked that question because hearing your story today and hearing you guys state what needs to be done. 25 years in, we're talking about 2013, the sacrifice that I could imagine, not just you all, but all of the mothers here, had to make to, for one, be present in your communities to lead these charges. The sacrifice you had to make to educate yourself, to be able to talk about the things we're talking about today, as far as policy changes. And similar to Naeem's question, thinking through what those community folks were doing. At what point did you say you need a Mothers Against Police Brutality? You need a coalition of concerned mothers? What was your thought process in those individual moments of saying that I have to create something for us?
I will say I thought about it early on, but I was so deep into the fight for justice for Gary. And then as time went on, I realized that this is not about Gary. It's way, way bigger than Gary. When I think about 25 years and we're talking about 1,000 killings a year over a decade, it's been like 1,000 since Gary was killed. So we're talking 25,000 lives and lost. And I'm like, I was in my family, I was the source of the strength for them. And I said, well, where's my strength? And as I thought about it, I said, my strength is in those that have gone through the same thing that I've gone through, those that have walked in the shoes that I have walked in. We can lean on each other. And that's when I decided, you know what, we need to put together something to help mothers, whether it be, us getting together just to look at one another, because we know that look, right? We know that look, we understand those feelings. And I was like, I need someone else because I didn't have it within my family, within my friends. You tend to lose family, you tend to lose friends. Yes. But this sisterhood that we have, I said, our sorority that we didn't pledge to be a part of is greater and bigger than anything I've ever experienced in my lifetime. Yeah.
For me, it was divine intervention. I did not want to do it. I wanted to live in my house on the golf course, play golf every once in a while, and I did not want to take this cup. And I'm a very spiritual person, whereas I am not religious, but I'm very, very spiritual. And it's like God started sending me all of these women out of the woodwork, like they were finding me. Well, this happened to my son, and I saw you on TV talking, and I saw you talk to Chief Brown, and we could never get anyone to talk to us. So to these women, they were seeing me opening doors, but to me, I was just navigating like I had been taught in corporate America. And I remember thinking that I just didn't want to do it. And God promised me rams in the bushes if I would take this walk. Not a ram, but rams in the bushes. And he has done that. And but I knew that there needed to be a vehicle like Mothers Against Police Brutality, with what I had learned at IBM and the partner programs that I had built and how I had learned to navigate and all of the meetings I had been in with C-level people. I wanted to bring that to an organization and run it as strategically so that it would have the ability to put families at tables where policies are being created, an organization that would have the staying power and to know how to open the doors, and also be prepared that if people wouldn't put us at the seat, we would build the table ourselves. So that's how my journey began with creating MAPB. And then I called John. You got to do this with me.
I You know, I think about that, and I think about, sometimes I was like, I look at my life's journey, and I look at the leadership role that I played at Bank of America, and how those skills that I had and I used in a corporate environment were carried over to, and it seems like when you're introduced to other mothers, everybody brings a certain skill to the table. It's like this was our assignment. We were designated, unfortunately our children are martyrs, but we were designated for this role because we bring it to the table, you know?
Thank you, ladies. I appreciate you.
Can I just add one thing, just a note? We're just taking some notes.
We're not emailing, we're not
Yeah,
typing.
just in case, I just wanted to make sure that you know we're very appreciative of allowing us to be here, and we just wanted to just make sure we capture some of our thoughts as you all are speaking, so.
Thank
Please
you.
forgive me for my failure to.
Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.
Please forgive me for my failure to acknowledge that. In fact, they are taking notes so that they can be helpful in their analysis. A few things that I heard. One is the importance of remembrance. It reminded me of one of my favorite Hebrew words, a word called zakar. And every time you see the word zakar in the Hebrew text, it speaks not just of remembrance, but remembrance that compels action. And so by remembering today, we are compelled to act. And I thank you for providing within your testimony very specific ways in which we can act and demands that we can make to end qualified immunity and to address laws that would make it illegal to use fatal force for someone who is moving away from you, in fact, running away. These are things that we can do. I also want to bring some individuals into the conversation. I'll attempt to do that throughout our time together. As a current student of rhetoric, as I listen to your testimony, I also hear it in light of the testimony of others. And so LG, who loved his mother's cooking. Who doesn't love their mother's cooking? But also loved hip hop. And from the great canon of hip hop lyricism that we have before us today, I thought of these words. Police watch us, roll up and try knocking us. One knee I ducked. Could it be my time is up? But my luck, I got up. The cop shot again. Bus stop. Glass bust. The fiend drops his Heineken. Those are words from Nasir Jones, 2002. All I have is one mic. But not only did I hear the words of Nas, but as Ms. Flanagan talked about her dreaming, she also spoke of her husband's knee buckling, whereby a dream became a nightmare. And here in D.C., we remember the words that were lifted from in front of the Lincoln Monument on August the 28th of 1963 by Dr. King. That before he said, I have a dream, he said that we can never be satisfied as long as a Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. Thank you for sharing your testimony with us today. Let's give them another great round. As we continue with our testimonies today, we want to bring forward Janet Baker, who will be honoring Jordan Baker of my hometown, Houston, Texas. Say his name. Jordan Baker. Say his name. Say his name. Jordan Baker. Also, Sheila Banks is honoring Corey Lamar Jones, Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. Say his name. Corey John Jones. Say his name. Corey John Jones. Monty Benjamin, am I saying that correctly? Honoring Javius Benjamin, Avondale Estates, Georgia. Javius Benjamin. Say his name. Javius Benjamin. Say his name. Javius Benjamin. Say his name. Javius Benjamin. Let us honor them in advance for their testimony. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. I would be remiss if I didn't say giving flowers to Colette and Mary and Gray Hopkins. They've been a strong force of encouragement for me through the most difficult times, and I'm sure the times ahead. So I just wanted to say that first and foremost. And I'd also like to start, Jordan would often say affectionately when he needed something, "You got me." So today is my version of saying, "I got you." So, my name is Janet Baker. I'm a mother, a legacy fellow with Mothers Against Police Brutality, and an advocate for justice. Not just for my son, but every family shattered by police violence. I'm here today because my only child, Jordan Baker, was unjustly taken from me. His life stolen by a system that too often devalues Black lives and shields those who kill with impunity. On January 16, 2014, Jordan was just riding his bike 3 blocks away from his home when he was profiled and confronted by an undercover narcotics officer moonlighting as a security guard. This Houston police officer said he saw Jordan looking through shop windows. A statement later proved to be false, and so what if he was? He claimed that after he approached Jordan, a struggle ensued. What happened next was a senseless tragedy. The officer chased Jordan down. He shot my unarmed son in the chest and then proceeded to hog-tie him like an animal. And he let my wounded child just lay there in the trash room alleyway, lying down, bleeding out. He didn't render any support, any aid, and he watched him bleed out and die. As the officer stood over him and didn't provide the medical aid with no regard for his life, just watching him bleed out, the officer stated later that he was in fear for his life. A story that is told by rogue officers in the United States and has allowed officers to kill with impunity. The story continues with, he fit the description, which permitted racial profiling of Jordan. Jordan's story is similar to so many other reports of racial injustice and disparities with communities of color. These stories plague our nation and make it such that young men and women of color are not free to live their lives, as their civil liberties are being denied. I often say one of the largest pains is that Jordan had a diminished quality of life. Jordan was not afforded the human right or ability to just live and be free. I hope that our collective work together will hold those who perpetuate these heinous acts of violence accountable. His death was not an accident. It was a result of a system that criminalizes Blackness, protects officers who kill with impunity, and denies families like mine and like those that are here today the justice that we deserve. Jordan had dreams, and he had every right to live. But his life was cut short because of bias, because of systemic failures, and because those sworn to protect and serve are too often shielded from accountability. I'm here because this must change. I'm here because my son's life mattered, and I will not stop speaking his name until justice is not a demand, but a reality. Thank you for listening.
morning, everyone. Good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank Ms. Collette and her team for allowing us to be here this week. And I just also want to say my journey has been much better because of you. Thank you. Hi, my name is Sheila Banks. I'm a fellow of Mothers Against Police Brutality and the aunt and godmother of Corey Lamar Jones. We lost Corey to a fatal police shooting October 18, 2015. Driving home in Lake Worth, Florida after working late that night, Corey had car problems on Interstate 95. Pulling off the exit ramp in Palm Beach Gardens, he called for roadside assistance. While Corey was on hold, Palm Beach Garden police officer Newman Roger, in plain clothes in an unmarked vehicle, approached him aggressively. Within seconds, gunshot erupted from Roger's weapon. This officer fired 6 shots at Corey, hitting him 3 times, killing him as he ran away. As he ran away from the gunman that Corey never knew was an officer of the law who had taken an oath to protect and serve. Who was Corey? Corey was a 31-year-old black man raised in a devout Christian home with his 2 siblings. My sister Anita Banks raised him as a single mother. Tragically, she passed away of breast cancer in 2006. We are beyond devastated to have lost both Corey and Anita. The entire family has never been the same. Our parents, siblings, children, cousins, family, and the whole community. Corey grew up in his maternal grandfather's church, where he developed in his skills for playing drums. He was beloved by family members, friends, youth mentors, family members and friends. He was a youth mentor and a lead drummer of the church. Corey was also a member of the band Future Presidents. With this group, he played his last performance. It took the police officer over 13 hours to notify us that Corey was murdered and to admit that one of their own officers was responsible for Corey leaving this earth. I will never forget that phone call. It altered the course of my life and began my pursuit for justice. In the midst of the initial pain, shock, and anger, I knew I had to not only fight for Corey justice, but also to honor my dear sister, Anita, Corey's mother. 3 days after Corey was murdered, Newman Roger told federal investigators of his account of what happened that fateful night. He put on an unbelievable creative act to the agent. He made false claims of self-defense in accordance to the stand your law grounds. However, Roger had no clue that Corey had the keen sense to keep his cell phone on as he approached the vehicle, causing the entire encounter to be audio recorded by the roadside insurance company. His lies were contradicted by hard evidence, eventually led Roger to termination and arrested in 2016, and to his 2019 conviction of manslaughter and attempted murder. Roger's time in prison, 25 years, would not bring Corey back, but we have some release in this outcome. Our journey to justice will not stop until innocent black men, women, and children no longer live with the fear of becoming victims of police brutality. I thank God every day that my family was one of the few to receive justice. However, I continue to stand with my sisters and brothers as they pursue their justice for their loved ones. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. And I will also add in with Sheila and Janet as well, that I'm grateful for the Lord allowing me to cross the path of Colette and Marion, and all the other families as well on this journey that I too have been on, seeking justice for my son as well. So again, good morning, and I thank you all. Again, I am Monty Benjamin, the mother of Javis Benjamin, who was born September the 2nd, 1992, who left this earth on January 18th, 2015. That January evening, Javis is seen running a red light by then Sergeant Lynn Thomas. Thomas radioed to dispatch that he was going to look for him. When he found Javis, it was at a scene of an automobile accident. Javis hit a telephone pole and wrecked the car and hit another vehicle. Thomas got out of his police car yelling at Javis to remain in his car, but then later he ordered him to get out. The driver's side of the car was caved in from the wreck. Javis then climbed out of the car window. Power is knocked out in the area. The residents begin to come outside. Javis yelled 3 times to the residents, "Do y'all see what he's trying to do to me? Do y'all see this shit? Do y'all see what he's trying to do?" Javis then turned and faced Thomas, who then shot him in the heart and in the lower abdomen. Javis then dropped to the ground. Once the paramedics arrived, they yelled for the police to remove their cars so that they can get to Javis. Javis, who lied dead, 20-year-old, a college student, with no criminal record or any prior altercations with law enforcement, and he was unarmed. Sergeant Lynn Thomas arrived at the accident, approached a wrecked vehicle, and demanded that he remain inside. Then he demanded him to exit the car. Then he shot the driver, my son Javis. Then the wheels of justice and injustice began to turn. On April 30th, 2015, the case went before an advisory grand jury to the DeKalb County Courthouse District Attorney Robert James. The panel strongly recommended indictment of Sergeant Thomas. The dash cam video showed that James did not assault the officer. The video was later altered by the time it was shown in court. It was not the same video that had been shown to our family. On May 1st, 2015, DA Robert James announced that he would issue a criminal warrant for Thomas to appear before a criminal grand jury. On March 16, 2016, more than 3 years after the homicide of my son, DA James announced that there will be no charges filed against Sergeant Thomas, after all, stating that the shooting was justified in self-defense by the officer. July 28, 2016, Officer Thomas was named chief of his police department, the Avondale State Police, allowing him to oversee his own investigation by the department. On September the 20th, 2021, Chief Thomas was allowed to resign in lieu of being fired after he failed to obtain state accreditations for the Avondale State Police Department because of the overwhelming lack of documentation and other compliances. On September 21st, the investigators found that Avondale State Police Department have racially profiled motorists for years. The city residence is 90% white, but the city manager, Patrick Bryant, said that around 75% of the drivers citations were given are blacks. Avondale State is well known in Georgia as a sundown town. It has a history of racially profiling people of African descent. In seeking accountability for the killing of my son, like many other mothers, I have run into serious roadblocks, specifically lack of legislation, standards for the use of deadly force, and the doctrine of qualified immunity. A criminal charge in deadly force cases depends on the officer's perception of danger. A civil case against an officer for wrongful death only succeed if they overcome qualified immunity claims. How is it that my unarmed son, who was likely in shock from an accident, became a mortal threat to Sergeant Thomas? How can Sergeant Thomas have qualified immunity for pulling his gun and shooting an unarmed man whose only fault in the situation was to have had a wreck? Our family will keep working for justice for Javis, but America itself, through the Congress, must work to bring accountability into police departments that today literally get away with murder. Thank you.
Again, thank y'all a ton. Because as you're speaking, you know, looking through the crowd, listening to you all, I see the emotions that's just being drawn up. Not even, I don't know if it's just from hearing your testimonies, but being in the space also. It's a lot of emotion. So thank y'all for continuing to have the courage to speak. Not just tell your story, but speak verbally. I know that's a lot. One thing that, you know, some of you I know personally, I've had a chance to work with you all, but we always see this consistency and the fight for narrative, and the fight to control the narrative, and the fight to unveil the truth. We're hearing, even just with the panel with Mary and Colette also, uncovering the lies and trying to find the truth at the same time is a practice that you have to learn. And it seems like a lot of you all have learned that practice, unfortunately. And the reason why I bring that narrative up is because listen to all your stories, even with Janet, him being chased and him bleeding out, and saying that he fit a description. What description is it? Being black? Right? Sheila, just listening to your story when you're talking about Corey and just him not even knowing who's shooting at him. But the insurance company caught it and uncovered the lie. Monty, with Javis too, just having a dash cam and showing video and him not being a threat. I know too well, I went through the same thing with my brother. There was a video, no audio, but a video. And I understand perception, and I understand the strength of narrative and what they make people want to believe. Or sometimes create a narrative to make you see what they want you to see. I make that statement because my question is, what is the process that you all had to undergo to really understand what parts of the story actually matter, right? Not saying that it doesn't all matter, but we know it's certain parts of it that we have to lean into and focus on to uncover the truth. But how do you even relay that narrative back to the communities who's witnessed it, to the families and friends who's supporting you, even to our jobs? We need the time off to be in certain spaces. How do you all interpret the most important aspects of building that narrative to tell your loved one's story and to pursue for justice? Please do.
So to answer your question, they're going to vilify the victim automatically. And in Jordan's case, it was, he fit the description, and then they started talking about crimes that happened in the area. And for Jordan to combat that was making him matter, making him human, telling that story and dispelling those things that weren't true, but again, trying to think outside of the box, being strategic, going to the community, the media. And they've said this thing, they said these lies. I'm gonna go right back to that same place to clean up those lies. And speaking for him, telling the truth, and again, the most important thing, making him human, showing that he matters, and saying who he was, and not just these the get out of jail free card, the statements that they've said, make it so that it doesn't stick, because it's not true and anyone reasonable will know, well, that just doesn't add up. So for me, it was making him human and giving him, telling his story, his true story.
Hi, Victor. For me, I think, and for my family, it was, I remember when we first got the news that we had lost Corey. We have another Corey in our family that's a little bit more radical than Corey Jones. I was like, oh no, it can't be Corey. You know, he's meek and mild. There's no way what you're saying is my nephew. So it was important to us to, that we showed who he was. We knew he was not aggressive. He was mild-mannered. His mom brought him up in church. So it was important to us to let the world, let the community know that that narrative that they had, that they put out for him was not true. So each time we had a chance to be on the microphone, we told our story. We let the community know. We let everyone know that this is Corey Jones, the meek and mild that would give anyone the shirt off of his back. So just making sure that, like she said, keeping that human person before the community, before the world, letting them know that no, he's a human being. Someone took his life that should have protected and served him. Yes. That person is the villain. No, this was a human being, a loving human being, a person that his family adored him. So that's what we kept saying over and over to make sure that the community knew. Who didn't know him, they know him now. They know who he is.
I would say my response is a little different. My first instinct was the motherly instinct that when I was initially told, I was given the false narrative that he carjacked someone and he assaulted the officer. Well, the following day, the Georgia Bureau of Investigators, GBI, the investigator's name was Investigator Stanley. It was a call from him that basically told me that because the case was under investigation, that he could not discuss the case. But he told me to reassure him, which was for my benefit, to make sure I get all 3 investigations. And he kept insisting because I was the parent. I had every right to each investigation. And that was the biggest part of the barrier of me getting justice for my son. So with me pursuing that, all doors were shut when it came to the police department, the prosecutor, as well as through the GBI. They were willing to give information, but they could not disclose without the consent of the prosecutor. So upon that, I became more persistent where, yes, my instinct was to clarify my son's name because I knew he would not assault an officer or carjack anybody because the car that he was driving was owned by his grandfather. But it was the urgency in the tone of that particular investigator who insisted, he persistently kept insisting, and I knew who my son was as an individual. So to some degree, it wasn't a matter of clarifying that he was a human. It's just that I know who he was, and I wanted to get to the bottom of what actually happened, considering the lie that they gave me. So once I got past that, and then with the barriers that I had to deal with when it came to the prosecutor and the police department, it was more so the cover-up and the false narrative and them trying to tear him down. Because one of the things that the interaction with the prosecutor as well as the GBI was that in the exchange of their conversation, he didn't understand, the investigator didn't understand, why is it that this young man didn't have any hits or targets on his record? What was the sole purpose of doing so? But then he had to back up because he had to wait for the consent of the prosecutor to say whether or not the case was closed. And they allowed the statute of limitation to exceed the 2, it went 2 years, 5 months before they actually allowed my family to even do our own private investigation because it exceeded the statute of limitations, which they was trying to stop us from being able to actually file any real legal suit. But because he exceeded the statute of limitations, it then gave us the ability to seek further. So I would say my thing was the heaviness of that investigator telling me to make sure I get all 3 investigations, and it's now been 12 years, and I still haven't got any of those investigations. So that was my thought.
Thank you so much for being here and for your testimony. I do also commend you. I think the narrative piece is really important. For it to be impactful, it has to be a part of a larger strategy. I think narrative alone, as we know, can move people, but sometimes it's not enough to move people to action. So being here with the Mothers Against Police Brutality and the Coalition of Concerned Mothers, it's obvious that you all get that the story is a big part of it, but it has to be accompanied by organizing, by action, policy change, and all the other pieces of a successful campaign. And Sheila, I just want to say, I also commend you for being here and standing with everybody, despite the fact that you have gotten, your family has gotten some semblance of justice and an outcome that's relatively unique in this space, unfortunately. But I think it also shows how special you are, because the current context that we're living in, it's become quite apparent that not everybody feels this way, that they have to show up for other people, even when their issue might have, come to a conclusion. I just have 2 clarifying questions if there's time. And it's more of a process question. Monty, am I saying your name right? Monty. Was the sergeant who was allowed to resign instead of being fired, were the circumstances connected to the incident, or was it like other things?
It was partly connected. My sister and my daughter, they made these flyers and they mailed it to each one of the city commissioners, and it had Jada's story on it, information. At the present time, they was filing for federal funding because they wanted to renovate the city. So in the midst of them doing so, the police department had to be investigated because the chief had to be certified in order for them to receive the federal funding. So based on them receiving those federal funding and the information came up pertaining to my son, then they had a deeper investigation where they found out when the prosecutor had dismissed the charges, that's when 6 months later, they promoted him to chief of police. He was a sergeant at the time, so he skipped rank without going through policy training to become a chief. So when they did the investigation, he wasn't qualified. Well, within that investigation, that's when they later found out how disruptive, corrupt that station was. They had to end up pretty much firing everybody. But they allowed him to retire based on that information.
I see. Thank you for that. And then, Janet, I didn't grasp. Was there a complaint filed against this officer? What was the process? Was he ever were there charges? Was he ever indicted, or what happened post?
Well, with the grand jury, it was a no bill, wasn't a true bill. And then we did go to civil, and qualified immunity didn't bear, we didn't get that piece of it, but we did get for the excessive force and the deadly force through that. So he's still working on the force, unfortunately, and no true accountability there.
Yeah.
Nothing else can bring back Jordan, but again, the accountability piece and true justice to ensure that it just doesn't happen again, or that there is some accountability for the officer and his actions, his heinous actions.
Thank you.
And thank you for the powerful testimonies. Thank you very much. Before you can go ahead. I do want to respond. Ida B. Wells said that the way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them. And I want to thank you for turning the light of truth upon Jordan, Corey, and Javius. Thank you for the courage in doing so. I couldn't help but see a symmetry in the testimonies that you offered, that these men were fatally harmed while in modes of travel. Alleys, streets, and cars, and bikes. It reminded me of one of the most damning documents ever produced in American history, that of the Green Book, designed in an attempt to help black people navigate this land without fear of molestation and harm. Brian Stevenson said that America is an open crime scene. And your testimonies today help to enforce that truth, that all around us, whether we be traveling through alleyways or streets or sitting in our living room eating ice cream, harm has a way of visiting itself upon us. And we have to work until justice is a reality and not just a demand. Also reminded me of a piece I wrote for the Huffington Post. I looked it up. It was on August the 17th of 2014, after the death of Mike Brown. And the title of that piece was Convenient Stores and Convenient Narratives. The criminalization of the victim and in criminalizing the victim, the brutality of the perpetrator is diminished. And so you kept talking about how after already being harmed, an additional harm now comes to the character of your loved ones.
Yes, yes.
Finally, I could say a lot. There's a lot to say. I'll be chewing on this and thinking about it and working through it a while. Even the reference to the sundown towns. Yes. And we know the harm that was caused. I can't help but think about the fact that as we're gathered here together in this sacred space, there are individuals taking a jackhammer to a road that says, Black Lives Matter. A brutality that is not just symbolic, but speaks unfortunately to the ways in which lives have been treated across the centuries. Now, I don't know what the full agenda is after we are concluded with our time together today, but in the name of black embodied resistance and performative symbolic resistance, I think it might be powerful for us to gather at that road that's being jackhammered together and to force this nation to bear witness to itself once again. I don't know if you want to join me there, but I'm happy to go along with you. And stand. We now come to the third panel for this morning. Geraldine Brown Bluford will be honoring Alan Bluford of Oakland, California. Say his name. Alan Bluford. Say his name. Alan Bluford. Say his name. Alan Bluford. Also, Deborah Jones Bush honoring Marquise Jones of San Antonio, Texas. Say his name. Marquise Jones. Say his name. Marquise Jones. Say his name. Marquise Jones. Also, Rosie Chavez honoring Jacob Dominguez of San Jose, California. Jacob Dominguez. Say his name. Jacob Dominguez. Say his name. Jacob Dominguez. Say his name. Jacob Dominguez. Let us welcome them as they come to offer their courageous testimony.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I know you're probably thinking, like, why is she standing there? The thing is that I've been doing this since 2012. And I have heard all of your stories and all of the names of every son, of every mother. And each time I hear your story is my story. And I carry your stories in my heart. So when I hear them, my heart cries out. So I'm going to read my story. But before I do, I'm just going to ask you to please stand up. Stand to your feet. This is the day that the Lord has made. Yes. So we shall rejoice and be glad in it. Yes. So I'm going to ask you to put your hands together and give yourself a hand. Good morning. My name is Chaplain Geraldine Brown Bluford, and I am an ordained elder, and I am a mother against police brutality. On May 6th, Alan Dwayne Bluford, my son, my youngest child, an 18-year-old African-American, high school senior with a 3.0 grade point average, was racially profiled and murdered in Oakland, California, 2 weeks before his high school graduation. Alan and two other African-American boys had walked to the corner store to grab a few snacks and await for their ride. He had just watched the Floyd Mayweather fight, and Floyd knocked out the guy in one round. So they went to the store to get some snacks. Police reports, court depositions, eyewitness testimony, and the autopsy described what happened next. The boys were standing where they could be easily seen by their ride. Suddenly, an unmarked police vehicle came driving up very aggressively. The police car had no lights, no siren. The boys could not have known, but that squad car was supposed to be responding to a domestic violence call several blocks away. Instead, Oakland police officer Miguel Masso, a Caucasian Hispanic man, braked in front of Alan and his friends, jumped out the car, never asking names or identification. He immediately threw one of the boys down on the curb. Very scared of Masso's angry demeanor, the boys asked, "What did we do?" Masso grabbed the second boy by the shoulder, shoving him against the fence, twisting his arm behind his back. "Shut up!" shouting. And notably, the boys are under arrest or read their rights. And then Alan proceeds to walk away. Masso lets go of the boy's arm and raced toward Alan. This is 3 African American males, 2 18-year-olds and 1 15-year-old. Alan turns back. He sees Masso charging at him. He takes off running. He ran everywhere since he was 9 months. He started walking and he ran that day. Alan is yelling at the top of his lungs, "I didn't do anything." And Masso turns off his body camera. He chases Alan 5 city blocks. Alan runs into a driveway of a home screaming, "I didn't do anything." Masso pulls his service weapon. He shoots himself in the foot. When he hears the gunshot, Alan falls to the ground. He's lying on his back. And Masso, his foot is bleeding. He walks over. He stands above young Alan. And he shoots my son 3 times in his chest and once through his armpit. And Alan's last words, according to witness statement, "I didn't do anything. Why did you shoot me?" Masso radios in, officer shot, need assistance." Another unmarked police car arrives and rushes Masso to the hospital. Young Alan Dwayne Bluford is left on the ground, bleeding out. Masso quickly retains an attorney through the police union. He refused to give a statement to the OPD chief of police, his boss. It took 2 weeks to give a formal interview to his superiors. Masso lied, saying Alan shot him. However, Internal Affairs found no gunpowder residue on Alan's hands. The shell casings at the site came from Masso's gun, providing the fact that Alan did not shoot him and that he lied. It proved he shot himself. He was suspended for 2 days. Wow. Internal Affairs also found that Masso made over 15 policy violations on the stop. Masso said he accosted the boys because they looked like they were doing something. He had no evidence. They were just 3 African American boys waiting on their ride, a clear case of racial profiling. Masso, in deposition, stated it was the fault of the city of Oakland for hiring him because they knew he had post-traumatic stress disorder from the Iraq War. And as a New York City officer, Masso faced misconduct complaints and was sued for beating and tasing an inmate whom he denied medical treatment. One federal lawsuit for excessive force. In Oakland, his excessive force turned deadly, and he murdered my Alan Dwayne Bluford. 2 years later, working for Hollister PD, Masso stopped a 50-year-old motorist, Earl Maldonado, arresting and beating him on the pretext of a license plate discrepancy that later proved false. And unlike Alan, Mr. Maldonado was lucky enough to survive. What rights did my son have on that terrible night? Did he have the right to life, to liberty, to the pursuit of happiness, to any of the rights any rights of the great Declaration of the U.S. and the United Nations? Yes, he did. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, Article 6 states, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the security of person, and no one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. Alan's human rights were clearly violated, but his murderer was never charged with any crime. Without criminal indictments to officers who killed them with their claims of qualified immunity and civil lawsuits, where do we go for justice? I tell you, Mothers Against Police Brutality advocates charging the deadly force policy and ending qualified immunity so that we can hold police accountable when they kill our loved ones. Loved ones from California like James Rivera and Kobe Friday and Jelani Lovin and Lorenzo Cruz and Eddie Taylor, Eddie Guerin and Stephen Taylor and Taman and Tommy Wilson and Samuel Wynn and Mallard Ballin and Darnell Benson and Miles Hall, DeJuan Armstrong, Stephen Clark. These are our sons, and we must end qualified immunity and deadly force. Thank you.
Giving honor to Colette. I thank her for accepting me in the Legacy program because I'm not a mother, but I'm an aunt. Good morning, my name is Deborah Ann Bush from San Antonio, Texas, and I'm a Legacy Fellow with Mothers Against Police Brutality. I am the aunt of Marquise Lampkin Jones, who was shot in the back and killed by San Antonio police officer Robert Encina on February 28, 2014. The death of Marquise put me in an arena I thought I never would be in. Upon his death, I discovered that my city was as bad and as unjust as any other city across America. There was no transparency. Officials lied and covered up Marquise's death. I became an activist because I didn't want to see another family go through what my family and I had to endure. We as Americans see what is wrong all over the world, but we can't or won't see what's going on in our own country. We as African Americans are treated with total disrespect when it comes to law enforcement. We are found guilty by the police, not a court, and the police become our judge, jury, and executioners at any scene where they are called. Officer Encina was an off-duty working private security at a popular restaurant, Chacho's, the night he shot Marquise to death. Marquise was walking walking away from a minor fender bender in the restaurant's drive-through lane. Encina shot my nephew, a 23-year-old black man who was only a passenger in the car that bumped another as they waited for their food. He was leaving the scene and he was no threat to anyone. How is a police officer threatened by a man with his back turned, moving away from the scene? Yet Marquise lay dead on the ground, shot in the back. On December 2015, a Bexar County grand jury no-billed Encina in the shooting death of Marquise. Officer Encina would never face a criminal trial. We lost our civil trial also, and he testified under oath when asked, did Marquise have a gun? No, he did not. He was asked, well, why did you shoot him? And his response was, I don't know. And we lost the civil trial. On in April 2017, Encina stood behind qualified immunity defense and the jury in our wrongful death case. He was not liable for any damages in the death of Marquise. The police department that trained Encina was not liable for any damages. The city of San Antonio that paid Encina's salary was not liable for any damages. The doctrine of qualified immunity needs to be abolished immediately. There was no accountability in the killing of my nephew. Our family alone had to bear the damage. There is no accountability in this unjust system unless and until we change it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rosie Chavez. Thank you, Ms. Collette. Like Deborah, I am an auntie, but I'm also a mother against police brutality. I have young men growing up in the city, and we are, it's something that I fight for not only my nephew, but for others in our community. My name is Rosie Chavez. I'm shaking, and I find myself shaking my leg, and it reminds me of my nephew because that's exactly what he used to do. And I'm from San Jose, California. I'm the auntie of Jacob Dominguez, a young brown American, a Mexican American. I'm also a legacy fellow with Mothers Against Police Brutality. Jacob was murdered by police officer Mike Pena. The police tried to make everybody believe that the Jacob they executed was armed and dangerous, that his past somehow is justifiable, that his past was made justifiable to gun him down the night on September 15, 2017. But the Jacob I know, my firstborn nephew, the kid I helped my sister raise, was much more than the mugshot blasted all over the news. Jacob was reportedly the suspect in 2 crimes that occurred the week before. He was under surveillance by San Jose Police Department, Covert Response Unit, and Merge units. On that day he was murdered, he was being followed by plainclothes officers in unmarked cars with no lights or sirens. Jacob had arrived at a stoplight about 7 p.m. when multiple vehicles surrounded him and boxed him in. Officers yelling profanities at him, officers calling for stun grenades, known as flashbangs, and Jacob sitting in the driver's seat unarmed, his hands raised. Before the flashbangs were even initiated, Officer Mike Pena placed himself directly in front of Jacob's vehicle. He fired 2 shots with an AR-15. One shot hitting Jacob in the face, killing him instantly, all within 20 seconds of the stop. After Mike Bingham murdered him, Jacob's lifeless body laid in the car. As they called a canine in, and the police dog tore up Jacob's jugular. San Jose Police Department promoted Mike Bingham a year later. Out of all those officers that were there, 10 plus officers, Mike Bingham was the only one that shot. Fearing for his life, In March 2019, a Santa Clara County District Attorney declined to file any charges against Mike Bean in the homicide of Jacob Dominguez. In May 2019, Sergeant Bean was involved in beating and tasing a young couple after a noise complaint while they were celebrating a birthday at 7:45 in the evening. In August 2022, our family's wrongful death civil suit went to trial. Mind you, in this trial, the car that would have shown the trajectory of the bullet was gone, lost, evidence, nowhere to be found. But the evidence we did have was Jacob's hoodie, and that was the elephant in the room during the civil trial. The jury found Mike being liable for using excessive force causing the death of Jacob. They awarded his wife $1.1 million in commissary damages for the years that Jacob would have provided for his life, but no punitive damages or nothing for her children, pain and suffering. The jury award was held up in court with the city filing motions asking for qualified immunity, appealing every denial for 2.5 years. The Jacob I knew, my firstborn nephew, my sister's only son of 2 children, the son that I helped her and supported her, was a caring, loving, and good heart, had a good heart. Nothing would bring out the big smile and laughter more than his children. Jacob Jr., Jordan, and Jalea were his everything. They didn't deserve their daddy to be taken from them. He didn't deserve to die the way he did. His mother grieves daily. The police took her only son, her firstborn, taken away from her in such a tragic and horrific way. Losing Jacob has had a huge impact on our entire family. The cops judged him for his past, but we rose up to be his voice and fight for justice. The city of San Jose and Officer Mike Pena, then Mr. Pena alone, appealed 3 times through the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals, all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court issued a denial of their last appeal on February 24, 2025. God was the last. God has the last word after all. Jacob's son, the oldest, was 7 when he died. And he has a lot of memories of him. And as a young man now who just turned 15, I asked him how he felt about it and what statement he would want to make. Jacob Jr. wants to be a pastor. Jacob Jr. has taken a lot of his pain and hurt into speaking and doing God's work. Statement from Jacob, now 15, saw this as a way. He says, this is what the power of prayer does. We are victorious because of God, because God is. This won't bring him back, but at least we know that justice has been served and he can finally rest. This also brings some sort of closure for us. We've always had faith and knew that God is the ultimate judge. It has been a long battle physically and mentally, full of pain and hurt and suffering, but God has prevailed. I'd like to take the time to also thank Debug, not knowing where to go and what to do when this happened to us in our city. Debug was a grassroots organization, social justice organization that guided me and the 14 other families that I've come along to build with these fellows as well. It has been very supportive. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your passion and your clarity and your courage. I don't have specific questions, just a couple of observations. I think number one, yes, they try to paint all the victims of police violence as they were the aggressor, they did something wrong. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether they actually have a record, they actually have a past, this country has something called due process, right? And so the police or any kind of law enforcement agency should not and does not legally have the right to serve as, judge, jury, and executioner, which they always do. So I just always remind the communities and the spaces that I'm in that we have to stop thinking of good people versus bad people and think about just basic human rights and dignity that should be afforded to all people, which is missing in every case, no matter what the situation of the person that's being targeted is. And I think it's for the last few years, as I've been doing this work for many decades now, racial profiling laws are important. Standards for use of force are important. But it comes down to a question of power. You can have all the racial profiling laws on the books. First of all, we've done a lot of studies, and most of them are very insufficient because they don't provide for a private right of action or data collection and some other piece. But one of the main problems, and you mentioned it, that the police union provided an attorney right away. And the political power that police associations, I don't even want to call them unions because labor unions are a different entity for the most part, and often these are just associations that have amassed these political power structures and have influenced elected officials to basically give away the community's rights for transparency and accountability. This is why when police unions get involved, when cops are in these situations, they have a right not to provide testimony in a timely fashion. They often have a right to access evidence before the families do, and a bunch of other ways that they have really protected themselves. So I think what I would love to see for us move into a lot more deliberately is how do we build power? In addition to the policy change is important, but until we have that political power as communities, the way that they do, the policy alone won't help. And impacted communities and families and mothers are and can be a very powerful force at the center of that movement to build power. So I just, there's just some observations, and I thank you again for your bravery and your testimony.
Geraldine gonna make me take this suit jacket off. I know that. I mean, we can ask questions, and again, thank you to Colette. Thank you to all the mothers, not just Colette. Right, we're all here because, as you mentioned earlier, with creating this group, it was a calling for you. But there's mothers who needed you just as much as you needed them. Same for me, just sitting here watching all of you guys fight. My brother, we didn't have parents. Our parents died. It's just me and my sister fighting for my brother. And I don't want to get too detailed. I know it's lunchtime, but I remember the third day after my brother was murdered, me and my sister, we had a vigil because my brother was fortunately killed in front of our family barbershop. And when we had the vigil, we were inside the barbershop trying to get logistics ready. I know how that goes, trying to get everybody on the same page. And somebody came running inside saying, Victoria, my sister named Victoria, it's some ladies outside for y'all. And we're like, what ladies? What ladies? So we like, all right, we coming. So we go outside. I didn't know their names in the moment, but then obviously I found out. It was, rest in peace, Cynthia Howell, who was Alberta Sprue's niece. It was Gwen Carr, Eric Garner's mother. It was Hortensia Peterson, a Carr Gurley's aunt. It was Carol Gray, Kimani Gray's mother. Oh my God, they're gonna beat me up if I don't remember everybody. But it was Howard Ba. Who else was there? Sorry, it was a lot. Iris Byers. It was mothers that came to me and my sister's aid. It was mothers that told us, you just beginning. It was Cynthia who took me under her wing and kind of gave me some tutelage around what am I up for. And I asked you guys earlier what your profession was. I'm a chef by trade. I didn't know nothing about any of this 10 years ago, nothing. And I'm formerly gang involved, I'm formerly incarcerated, I'm all those things where I should not be considered the person to sit on the side, so I thought, right? But listening to your stories, listen how you talk about your loved ones, not just when their lives were stolen, but who they were to you. Pound cake, right? I heard earlier you guys were talking about the humanization of our loved ones. Why is the onus on us to humanize our loved ones?
Right.
You get what I'm saying? And because of my gang involvement at one point, I followed Fred Hampton forever. I loved what he's done. And my mantra, you know, we dare to struggle, we dare to win. And you ladies, everyone, your supporters, the folks who are supporting you, it matters every word that comes out of your mouths. Every word that comes out of all of our mouths. It matters. And I remember last night I was writing, so I said, I don't want to go up there and embarrass myself. I can always speak from the heart, and, you know. And I was just writing stuff down that I think would have been relevant. And one thing, even now, just hearing specifically you, the three of you, just let that span for one section. Each of you shared something that was profoundly personal and painful. But it's through the testimony, through truth telling, that I think we begin to understand the depth of the crisis that we're in. This isn't just us losing loved ones. We're in a crisis. Reverend Waters said earlier, we're in this space now, but blocks over, they're tearing up a block that's a symbolization of the crisis that we're in. And I think that we're reminded that it's not just about policies and statistics, right? It's about real lives. Lives that have been lost, lives that have been disrupted, and lives that continue to fight for justice, recognition, and accountability. And I say accountability specifically after justice, because what does justice look like for any of us? And I'm not minimizing the pursuit of justice either. But when we talk about accountability puts a mechanism in place where we can stop our neighbors from getting those phone calls that we've gotten. Where we can go to sleep at night and not have to wonder, well, did my baby make it in or not?
Right.
So I urge you all to continue to fight, to continue to hone your narrative, to continue to hone what does it mean, what does this mean to you all? Because I know, I've spoken to a lot of individuals, it's not just about your loved ones. But as y'all go out in the next week, come in and speak to Congress and go to the Hill, or go back to your communities or talk to folks who's watching the social media posts that's gonna go up, and folks reach out to you, what can I do? My charge to y'all is, what do we respond to them back with? Is it just the support? Is it to stand in solidarity? Or is it for them to get out there to understand the crisis that we're all in and figure out what their accountability looks like? So I'll start with that, but I love y'all. Thank y'all for sharing that. I'll tell you
I just kind of, I promise it'll be 2 minutes, but I gotta tell you this. What I've learned being a MAPB fellow. Now, I love Colette. She and I and Marion and Allie and Medea, hey, we came here in 2015 and we knocked on some doors and we went to the Department of Justice. And what they told us, Victor, was, we're sorry for your loss, but we can only prosecute the police according to this part of the law. And if you want to get prosecution for your children, you have to change the laws. So I started thinking, we gotta have laws, because they got laws to protect them. Police officers' Bill of Rights, they got qualified immunity, they got all this stuff to protect them. What do we have? We need our laws. So that's one facet of it. But we gotta work with the people who vote the laws in. So I knew I was coming here. We have prepared for 3 years. Colette has got us, we have ammunition. So I started using some of my ammunition because The staff was calling, saying, Mothers Against Police Brutality are coming to Washington, D.C. Can we get a meeting? They wouldn't call us back. They wouldn't even talk to us. These are the people we voted in. So guess what? There's all these people here in this room. You have thousands, I've seen your pages, thousands of people who follow you on social media. Guess what? You use that voice. You tell your story. You talk about your son. They victimize the victim, but we humanize the human, okay? And then you tell your lawmaker, guess what? We voted you in, and you speak for us when you cast that vote. Now, if you don't use that vote to speak for me, move. Because I'm going to vote somebody else in that's going to speak for me with their vote. And you take your 2,000 followers or your 20,000, whatever you got, and you start educate. It's educate, advocate, outreach, and support. And that's what I learned at work, which is not me, but Mothers Against Police Brutality is live and personal. They put it in action. So go, you're gonna have to change the laws, but you use your voice and you use your platform to gather the support. Just like he said, it was the mothers that showed up. I didn't know nothing about it. If it wasn't for the Oscar Grant people, if it wasn't for Miss Colette, if it wasn't for Allie, if it wasn't for Cole Pink, we all wouldn't have known what to do. But that's just a tidbit. Go do it. Thank you.
Let's give them another hand for their career. So we're on our way to lunch, but I have a few remarks I want to make very quickly because I don't want to stand between you and lunch too long. Elder Bluford offered us a very important reminder, and that is that joy is resistance. This is a day that the Lord has made. We shall rejoice and be glad in it. The joy of the Lord is my strength. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And somehow, in the midst of all that we have experienced, and no one can ever say they know what you are going through unless they've gone through it, I marvel at the fact that even in this space, there is still joy. So thank you so much. Give yourselves a hand. Thank you so much. We'll continue to fight on. Also, the statement, your story is my story. As Dr. King said, we are tied together in a single garment of destiny, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Until your story becomes my story, we cannot truly fight for change. And so thank you for sharing your story so that it can become a part of our collective story as we work together. Final thing that is important to me to uplift in this moment, two things in fact, is that it's not just the harm of the brutality of the death of our loved one, but it's also the callous way in which their bodies were treated afterwards. And so I'm carrying that in my heart, that it's a multiplicity of harms, harm on top of harm. And then also to state the fact that so many mundane activities leading to fatalities, getting snacks, sitting on the porch, playing video games, eating ice cream, playing in the playground, shopping, jogging, sleeping, breathing. We hold the fact that through mundane activity in this nation, it has brought too many fatalities. And we'll continue to fight until justice comes. I believe now we're at lunch. And how are we doing that, John? Buffet lunch set up right over there. Buffet lunch set up right over there. All right. Lunch is served. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt this enriching conversation happening around these tables. I know that it is life-giving and affirming, and I'm thankful for the opportunity that we've had to break bread together. We're getting ready to continue on with our panels. We have 3 afternoon panels, and once again, I want to honor the courage and strength that you are sharing with us in this space. And with the same intentionality, we seek to listen to these panels as they are bearing witness to the harm that they've experienced, and in fact that we have all experienced due to police brutality. And so as we are coming together again, we're going to have our next panel, Adrian Hood, who is honoring Henry Green V of Columbus, Ohio. Adrian Hood honoring Henry Green V. Say his name. Say his name. Say his name. We also have Delphine Robinson Stevens honoring Jabril Robinson, Clayton County, Georgia. Did I say that correct, Jabril? Is that correct? Jabril. Thank you. Say his name. Jabril Robinson. Say his name. Jabril Robinson. Say his name. Jabril Robinson. And then on this panel, we'll also have Kathy Scott Lukes. Likes. Thank you. Likes. Honoring Jarvis Likes of Columbus, Georgia. Jarvis Likes of Columbus, Georgia. Say his name. Jarvis Likes. Say his name. Jarvis Likes. Say his name. Jarvis Likes. We welcome you in your testimony. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I have to start by absolutely acknowledging Ms. Colette and Mr. John for giving me the opportunity to be a fellow. There's a little joke behind that because technically I wasn't supposed to be here. Couldn't get my application to work right, but thank goodness for relationships and talking to Mr. John ahead of time as I was doing a little investigative work on our candidates for police chief in Columbus at that time. And I had to find a reporter that knew a little something about the potential police chief that came from Dallas. And in my Googling, I found Mr. John's name and reached out to him. So thank you, Mr. John, because without you, I would not be here for sure. My name is Adrian Hood, and as he said, I am the mother of Henry Green V. This is probably the only time that I call him Henry because he is affectionately known as Bubby to our family because I refused to call him Henry. And it's only because he's the fifth that he has that name. But I'd also like to thank the other Reverend, I'm sorry, I forget his name, not Reverend Waters, but the other gentleman, for invoking into this space the word lament. Because oftentimes we are taught that the injury happens and then we skip over everything and go to forgiveness. And lamenting is necessary. Again, my name is Adrienne Hood. I am a veteran, retired from the Air Force Reserves back in 2020, and I am the mother of Henry Green, and also a fellow with Mothers Against Police Brutality. When I should be and should have celebrated my son's 32nd birthday just this past Thursday, unfortunately, we are here, but nonetheless still thankful for the opportunity to be with such awesome mothers and families every time that we get together. So the light of our family, the jokester of our family, the comedian of our family, and the cook of our family is gone. I really wish I would have got that recipe for that sauce for the meatballs, but nonetheless. My son Henry Green was 23 when he was gunned down by two plainclothes officers, police officers in Columbus, Ohio. Henry was walking in our neighborhood with a friend back to my sister's house when he crossed paths with evil, as I call it, on June 6th of 2016. These officers were in an unmarked vehicle, Florida tags and tinted windows. They initiated an encounter with my son who had done nothing illegal. There were no complaints. No one had called in anything. He had committed no crimes. The officer driving, acted like he was going to hit my son, according to his friend that was with him. To which my son, being himself, got smart with them and continued to walk across the street. These officers then came up the next street because each of the streets is a one-way, but came up the next street at a high rate of speed, according to all the witnesses, with their guns drawn and visible behind the windshield. Not one witness stated that the officers ever identified themselves as police officers. The officer that was driving actually fired his gun through his driver's side window at my son, shattering the glass as he shot my son. And mind you, this was a sunny afternoon, evening, and there were many people outside, children out in the yards playing, and this officer had no regard for that. My son did return fire in self-defense to the unknown gunman before he was fatally wounded by 8 shots out of the 23 shots that were fired on that day. We were told the officer's initial story was that my son was standing on a corner brandishing a weapon. I asked the detective, who was black, what Henry was doing on that day that was wrong. Even if that was the story, since Ohio is an open carry state, what was my son doing wrong? And still to this day, no answer. At my pushback, their narrative began to change. But with the police department investigating themselves, the officers were cleared because unfortunately, Ohio is a home rule state. The Franklin County Grand Jury issued a no bill, which is no charges, in 2017. In 2022, I led my family through 2 wrongful death civil lawsuits because the first trial ended in a hung jury. And these officers walked away with no liability through a defense based on the doctrine of qualified immunity. And still to this day, I wonder how it is in any years in the 2000s that we are still having all white juries. It still baffles my mind. This lack of accountability exists, in my opinion, for 3 distinct reasons: qualified immunity, use of deadly force precedents that was set in 2 Supreme Court decisions, which is Tennessee versus Garner and Graham versus Connor, and the Fraternal Order of Police, which you mentioned them earlier. I don't know how they call those unions, but that's a story for another day. No matter how egregious the act, oftentimes the officers involved are not held criminally accountable or liable in civil court either. I often ask what we can do. Who can we turn to for help? It seems that all the odds are stacked against us. I sit here before this panel hoping and praying that action will be taken to push this country to move in the right direction and advocating for all of its community members. There is not one career in this country where it is more difficult to hold someone accountable than policing. No officer should be above the law. They are to enforce the law, not break them. I ask of you today, please take our stories to heart and push for the changes that are long overdue. There is nothing that can be done to bring any of our loved ones back, but we can certainly move in a way to protect the lives in the future. I think that is why it is challenging for me to say justice when it comes to my son or any of our loved ones, because justice would be us being restored and made whole, and that can't happen